All right, I see we're live streaming. Does that also mean we're recording?
Just one moment here.
Oh,
You'll hear the announcement.
there we go. All right, get my gavel out, make it official. And good morning. I'm going to go ahead and call this session of the City of Lacey Hearings Examiner to order. For the record, today is December 14th, 2023, 10 a.m. We have one item on the agenda this morning. This is number 230180, the Morel Meadows PRD, and it involves a request for approval of a preliminary plat to subdivide approximately 32 acres into 179 single-family residential lots as a planned residential development, or PRD, on property that is located at 8322 Stillicum Road Southeast here in the city of Lacey. My name is Andrew Reeves, and I serve as the city's hearings examiner, which we confirmed moments ago, just to be sure. But my role today will be to collect evidence in the form of exhibits and testimony to determine whether this proposal is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan, zoning ordinances, critical areas ordinances, and then the specific criteria for approval of a planned residential development under Chapter 1660 of the Lacey Municipal Code, as well as the requirements for a preliminary plat under Title 15 of the code. And then because this proposal would involve the subdivision of land, also ensure that it complies with our state subdivision act, which is in Chapter 5817 of the revised Code of Washington. And then perhaps I will also be ruling on a forest practices permit. It showed up or didn't show up. I will make sure I know one way or the other if I am weighing in on that, but I know that is also a permit that is potentially applicable in this case. To that end, I received 21, I believe was the number I reviewed in advance of the hearing, 21 exhibits that I had an opportunity to review. And these include a staff report prepared by city staff, the application materials themselves, including various project plans, as well as technical reports. And these technical reports included information related to how stormwater would be addressed on site, also in relation to the soils and their capability for infiltration and things of that nature. Information about potential critical area habitat on site, including whether there's any of those Mazama pocket gophers that are sometimes something we think about here in South Puget Sound, as well as the Oregon white oak or Gary oak, and that has been addressed in actually quite a bit of detail, in particular to this project, and we can talk more about that as needed. Information on traffic, and then basic project plans, sort of civil plan set, plat map, etc. And then information on the environmental review that occurred under our state's Environmental Policy Act, or SEPA, including the Mitigated Determination of Non-Significance, or MDNS, that was ultimately issued by the city, and to the best of my knowledge was not appealed. And we can touch on that if needed. And then information on the notice that was provided in relation to the application, as well as SEPA in today's hearing. And then finally, some comments that were received from agencies that reviewed the proposal, as well as public comments from I want to say maybe 7 or so members of the public that ultimately were received. And those were included as Exhibit 21. And I certainly did have an opportunity to look at them in advance of the hearing. So I'm going to admit those 21 exhibits into the record. Should anyone have additional exhibits they would like admitted into the record, let me know when it's your opportunity to testify, and I'll address admitting additional exhibits at that time. All testimony today will be under oath or affirmation. That's because were there ultimately to be an appeal, part of the record would be today's hearing, the audio of it, as well as the admitted exhibits and testimony, and then ultimately the final decision. I do note, I believe we're still in the universe in the city of Lacey, wherein I make a recommendation to council in this instance, and then at a closed record hearing, council will make a final determination. I'll let planning staff verify that. I know there's been discussion and change very recently about that potentially changing, but I believe in this instance, I am making a recommendation as opposed to a final decision. Again, we can verify that momentarily. Reese looks ready to talk, but I am almost done, I promise. And so, point being, we'll clarify whatever needs to be clarified, but uh, folks were invited to participate remotely or potentially in the hearing room. I don't believe anyone is in council chambers. It looks like a no there. I do see it on Zoom. It looks like a beautiful empty chamber room. Perhaps Grant Beck's in there by himself somewhere, but ultimately, the plan would be to first hear from city staff, who will give sort of a brief overview on the review process that led us to today's hearing. After that, we'll hear from the applicant and their team, and that will be their opportunity to provide additional information on this proposal in advance of my making a decision. And then we'll see if there are members of the public interested in testifying. And if so, they would have an opportunity at that point. And then and I believe that the raise hand feature has been enabled for that exact purpose. So when we get to that point in the hearing, I will call out and see if there are folks interested in testifying. And then after we hear from the public, we'll turn back to applicants and city staff to respond to any such testimony. So with that, we'll get started. Thank everyone for being here, and I'll get Reese Fant on behalf of city staff sworn in. So thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth in testimony you give here today?
I do.
If you could just state and spell your name for the audio and explain your role here at the city.
Yeah, my name is Reese Fant, Reace, Fant, Fant, and I am an associate current planner here at the City of Lacey.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. So it sounded like you had some things you wanted to chime in on, and please go ahead and start with those.
Yes. So first things first, when it comes to process, in effect, as of Tuesday, our council is no longer involved in our hearings examiner process. So to the best of my understanding, you are it's no longer a recommendation. I believe you are the final step.
Okay, so the idea being, although we do have a concept of vesting in the state of Washington, essentially procedures do not vest. And so ultimately, the idea being that I myself am the one that will make the final decision for the applicant or their team. Do they want to weigh in on this idea? In my mind, it actually would expedite things, I think. But Mr. Pantier, did you or your representative want to speak to this one issue before we get into anything else? And
we agree with the city's current
I'm gonna swear you in if you're actually testifying. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth in any testimony you give here today?
I do.
If you just state and spell your name, you won't have to do it a second time later, I promise.
Jeff Pantier, Pantier, and I'm Senior Vice President with Hatton Godat Pantier. Today, I'm representing the applicant, D.R. Horton.
Great. And to that extent, in terms of what I just discussed, you were about to say.
The applicant concurs with the current city process whereby the examiner will make the decision on the plat and not a recommendation as was previously laid out by city code, I guess. But so we consent to the hearing examiner's decision.
Excellent. Okay, so no matter what I decide, you've consented. No, sorry. It's early in the morning. Bad jokes abound, but it sounds as if you concur with the concept, which is essentially that this will be our first go. And to be clear, for anyone that may be unfamiliar with process here in the city of Lacey, I work in or have worked in 50 or so cities and counties in the last decade, and Lacey was one of the very last that had this process in place. So for me, would be the traditional process whereby I make a final decision and any appeal of that decision by either the city itself, the applicants, members of the public, is to the Superior Court under our state's Land Use Petition Act, or LUPA. There's not an additional step. So with that, I'll go back to Reese Fant. So did that cover process then, Mr. Fant?
Yes, that covers process.
What?
And then secondly, there was one last exhibit that I would like to have in the record. It was one more public comment on the proposal. from a prior public commenter, a Nancy Poltney.
Okay. I'm familiar with the name, but shall we just make that number 22 today? Additional public comment?
That sounds good.
And you'll ensure my office receives a copy as well as the applicant?
Correct.
Great. Okay.
With that, I can dive into just a brief overview and the notification process that we've gone through, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, that works. Thank you.
Okay. So let's see. So the application for this project, the PRD, along with its associated materials, came in on June 21st of 2023. It was deemed complete on the 19th of July, 2023. The comment period and notice of complete application had a 14-day comment period that ended on August 2nd, 2023. Notices were published on the Olympian and on site. These notices have been attached as exhibits. The city received a number of comments, roughly in the range of half a dozen, both from the public as well as agency comments on the matter. They have been attached as the later exhibits, I believe 20 and 21.
And 22 at this point.
And 22 here for this last one. Thank you. And then as for notice of the hearing, let's see, notice was sent out by mail to all of the property owners and parties of interest within 300 feet of the property on December 4th. Notice was published in the Olympian and post on site. And then lastly, let me find the date of notice for the MD&S here. The MD&S mitigated determination of non-significance was issued on October 18th, 2023. And that was related to comments provided by the Department of Ecology with regards to potential cleanup on site due to the Tacoma smelter plume, which is a common condition that we receive out in the Hawkesbury area.
And we prefer to call it the Asarco plume for those of us that reside in Tacoma to try to disassociate the name of our city with the plume. But anyways, please continue.
Lastly, I can go over a description of the proposal, which we've touched on already. The Morel Meadows plat represents 32 acres into 179 single-family lots. Instead of the traditional subdivision route, it is going through a planned residential development. This is due to the fact that the lots are not, it's not increasing the traditional density of the site, which is 6 units per acre, but rather reducing the traditional lot size on the site. And in doing so, this has been offset with the 30% open space on site, which is consistent with the PRD process. And we can dive into that a little bit later. That's the quick staff analysis on it. Is there anything specific you'd like me to touch upon, Mr. Reeves?
Sure. Well, a few things, I suppose. First off, to be clear, the use of the PRD, as you just stated, the idea being that there's certain options, bonuses, alternatives that are allowed when you use a PRD, but the idea is there's a certain amount of clustering. I don't want to use that in a technical sense. I'm using that in an informal sense. But the idea being that in this instance, they're not seeking a higher level of density, i.e., more homes on the given available space, but they are going to have potentially smaller lots and some alternatives to minimum lot, widths, etc. But the goal being ultimately to preserve tracts of open space, and I think in this instance, a lot of it relates to the Gary Oaks, which or Oregon Oaks, whatever we're calling them, which I think we'll probably touch on. But is that the basic concept there?
Correct. Yeah. It allows for alternative site design, alternative lot design, sizing, various elements, and then has the intent to preserve natural space and open space.
Sure. And then in terms of the site itself, my understanding is that historically this was the mushroom farm. I think hence the name Morel, Meadows or Morel or however we pronounce that particular mushroom. But this is not an undeveloped property, as it were. Is that also accurate?
Yeah, this is the site of the Ostrom's Mushroom Farm, and I believe they had moved out in the late 2020, and the site has since been kind of a derelict building and a bit of a public nuisance. So yeah, it is not Greenbelt.
Sure. And then if you know the answer, great. If not, ultimately, I can defer this later to the applicant. At various points, I've seen that there are two tax parcels involved, sometimes one parcel. It seems that 32.08 acres is the number in terms of size, but do you happen to know?
I could let the applicant touch on the specifics of that.
Okay, no problem. And then let's see. In terms of the forest practices permit, do you happen to know, am I weighing in on that or not?
It falls under your review since the quasi judicial process for the PRD is the overarching umbrella. It's just a smaller permit that falls somewhere underneath. It would generally be a full admin permit, and that has to do just with mainly the intent is so that once any decision on site is made and there's any kind of grading, clearing, and forest removal, that if a certain board feet of tree comes down, that DNR is notified of whatever decision happens here so they can follow up on it.
Sure. I just want to verify that I should have a finding and conclusion that essentially mentions this.
Yes.
Comes up sometimes in Lacey, sometimes it doesn't. I just want to make sure that I include it. The criteria involved are pretty minimal, and ultimately, as you note, it is really more about notice to DNR so that they know what's going on. But just wanted to make sure that didn't get overlooked, especially given that I'm the final decision maker. So essentially, there are three things I'm ultimately looking at: PRD, which is part of the plat, and then 1, 2, and then forest practice 3. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then next question I had was, and again, if the applicant's the better person to talk to, there is reference a couple places, but one was in the SEPA checklist, which I know probably occurred a bit earlier in the process, but to this potentially being a phased development and 100 units being developed first, and then after that, another 79. I just wanted to ask if there's more information or if it has an impact to the extent that in some jurisdictions, when phase development is proposed, it does have an impact with timelines and allowable timelines. I don't know if I know the answer right off the top of my head in terms of the city of Lacey, but was this something that was discussed or was it later changed? And again, it's better.
I believe it was briefly discussed in the pre-sub process. This isn't something that I've touched upon much with the applicant. With regards to the planning scope of things, it doesn't have massive impact. There are elements of it that can't be phased in per se, with regards to landscaping, tree tracks, things of that nature, to some extent. Largely, I believe it has higher impacts to do with public works. But that's something that I think can be ironed out as time moves on. But I'll let the applicant touch upon that a bit more on their vision.
Okay, and then Sorry, just going through my notes here. Just because traffic is something that I know some public comments had been raised concerns about. My understanding in this instance, Mr. Fant, is that the traffic review looked at the impacts that had existed when this was the mushroom farm.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially it was determined that the impacts would be essentially the same or potentially even less if it were a residential development. Is that accurate?
Yeah, to my understanding from our traffic folks determined that it would have less of an impact, less trips overall than Ostrom's had the prior use.
Okay. And then I just some technical questions about stormwater. I'm happy to speak with Doug Christensen if that would be the best person to turn to.
I think so.
Okay, so Mr. Christensen, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth in testimony you give here today?
I do.
If you could state and spell your name and explain your role here at the City of Lacey.
My name's Doug Christensen. That's D-O-U-G. Last name Christenson. I'm senior stormwater engineer in City of Lacey Public Works Department. So I review the stormwater aspects of virtually every development proposal that comes through Lacey.
Excellent, thank you. So my understanding, not that I'm a stormwater engineer or an engineer of any kind, but my understanding of what's being proposed is that low impact development techniques are the intent, and that the applicant intends on having 100% infiltration on site, meaning all the stormwater, all the rain that falls ultimately gets addressed on site, and this would be through creation of 3 infiltration ponds as well as 4 bioretention cells. Is that an accurate base understanding of where things are in terms of the proposal?
Yes, current practice is to retain and keep stormwater somewhat dispersed on a site to more closely replicate the natural hydrology, as opposed to a couple of decades ago when wet ponds and single infiltration ponds were more the standard. Now we try to do it in multiple smaller facilities to keep that water distributed.
And there's a recognition that groundwater and surface water have a relationship to each other, right? I mean, that's part of the concept of infiltration, correct?
Absolutely.
But in terms of this project, the one thing I wanted to ask was, my understanding is that you, I believe, have requested and asked that continued a further study through the course of the wet season right now continues, just to ensure that prior to full site development, there's no concern that using 100% infiltration would create issues. And this to me seemed particularly important because I know a few of the public comments, especially I think related to adjacent properties with, I think it's Hawks Prairie to the north, had some concerns about potential impacts. Am I understanding the situation?
Yes, the existing community to the north, which I believe is called Hawks Ridge,
Okay.
has some existing issues with drainage. It's immediately to the east of that development. There's designated wetlands there, so it's kind of a low wet area to begin with, and we just annexed Hawks Ridge. The City of Lacey did about 2 years ago, and our operations staff has been out there. There's there was kind of some deferred maintenance that they were addressing, which should help with the drainage issues they had.
Sure, but am I correct that one of the conditions being proposed is that ongoing sort of study of
Oh.
occurs here through the wet months to ensure that the proposed stormwater management plan, I mean, you know, you've looked at, and I've been provided the sort of higher level plan, but the idea being you want to ensure all the data lines up through the
correct.
wet months. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
So the initial review was last summer, and I stopped the review clock to get more information, geotechnical information primarily, and information from the design engineers. And then one of the conditions would be that during this current wet season, specifically between December and April, when our groundwater levels are highest and the soil saturation is highest, that they do some further geotechnical analysis at the locations they propose to do stormwater infiltration, just to verify that everything should be fine during this wettest time of the year.
Okay, I think we're on the same page, but so, and ultimately, if there ended up being a problem, what happens at that point? Is it possible to come back? Is it, or can that be dealt with administratively somehow? If you're not the right person to ask, I'm just curious.
Well, if they'd be meeting our current stormwater design manual, which was just updated last year. It's the 2022 edition, so it's current state of the art in stormwater management in all of Western Washington. So this is it's it's a higher level of analysis and design before we go to construction to be sure things are going to work properly.
Sure. Okay.
We don't look at single storm events anymore. We look at the whole pattern of rainfall. So it's really a more in-depth analysis.
Excellent. Okay. Anything further you wanted to add at this point before I turn back to Mr. Fan?
No, their stormwater submittal was pretty good, really. Their drainage report was, very comprehensive, and I think they're going to be in pretty good shape with this additional wet season analysis.
Great. Well, thank you for your thoughts today.
Thank you.
So I'll go back to Mr. Fant, and then Mr. Fant, the other sort of major topic I was hoping to hear from, if there is someone on staff, just had to do with the sort of existing strands of trees and the Gary oaks or Oregon oaks, whatever we're calling them. I know that EnviroVector prepared a report, and I believe it was peer reviewed by Sound Urban Forestry. But I know that this is a species in particular that is protected, and there's been a thought or there's work being done to ensure that this is appropriately addressed. And I think Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife gave its own sort of weighed in on that as well. But if you or someone on staff could just speak to that before we move next to the applicant, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, so as the site plan shows, essentially 10 acres is going to be set aside on the north and then east portion of the site, where a majority of the oak trees stands currently are, or it'll be incorporated into some of the open space areas. So from what I've seen, to the best of the applicant's ability, preservation of the oaks has been addressed, and Sound Urban Forestry intends to review any grading plans and tree protection on site moving forward, and any once the formal landscaping is turned in that calls out these tree tracks as well, they will be reviewing that to ensure that it's being protected.
Okay.
And then we would defer to any of their recommendations on the matter.
The arborist recommendation.
The arborist, correct? Yes.
Certainly. Okay. Great. Thank you. Well, let me just make sure I didn't miss anything here. No, and then my final question, the additional exhibit we are going to include, I believe we're calling it number 22. You said was from, I think, Nancy Polney. I haven't seen it yet, but did it bring up something entirely new? Is it sort of in line, to the best of your knowledge, with what was already provided? Just making sure I'm aware of kind of what
From
that.
what I can tell, it does fall in line with her prior comments. In underline as the two main points she has made here, drainage of Morel Meadows is a concern, and Gary Oaks.
There, my notes say Gary Oaks retention, no drainage to Hawks Ridge under her
Perfect.
name. You know, seemingly further concern, but there's a reason I asked about both those things. So,
Yeah,
you know, I'm certain that as a party of record, if she's not participated today, she'll be kept abreast of what's going on,
yeah.
and we'll be able to move forward from there. Okay, well, I don't think then, unless you had other members of staff you intended on calling on, I didn't have any specific additional questions at the moment, and my plan was to next turn to the applicant.
Perfect. No, sounds good to me.
Okay, so Mr. Pantier, you're already sworn in, but thank you for being here. And with that, your opportunity to clarify, present any additional information would be now.
Thank you, Mr. Examiner. So I'm going to first introduce the team that's present today. Then I'm going to introduce a few extra exhibits. I think I've got 4 exhibits to enter in. Then I'll provide a recap without trying to be, I'll try not to be too redundant with Reese's comments, recap of the project. Then we've got a couple of comments on the staff report. I have a few comments related to the PRD that's before you today. And then I'll talk a little bit about the various reports that have accompanied the application.
Okay, I've only got like 4 hours set aside. Are we good? It sounds like
We are good.
But go ahead.
It'll be brief, I promise.
All right. I know.
Today we've got Raylyn Holquist and Clint Lucas with D.R. Horton. Myself, I've already introduced myself. To my left is Chloe McIntyre. She's the engineer for the project. Mary Jo Dingler, she's legal counsel for D.R. Horton on this. And Dan McKinney, our traffic engineer.
Okay, all right. I think I see everyone, and I think, yeah, Mary Jo Dingler. Yep. Thank you for being here. And I see Raylyn. I see Dan McKinney. Yep. And Clint Lucas is D.R. Horton as well. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. Well, thank you. So you've introduced your team. I appreciate it. And with that, next you were gonna provide.
I'm gonna introduce some exhibits just to make sure the record is full and complete. So in the MDNS, there was a condition related to the Asarco smelter plume, not the Tacoma smelter plume, just the Asarco smelter plume. And on December 7th, 2023, we had the Riley Group perform some arsenic and lead sampling of the site, and they produced a report that finds that the arsenic and lead samples do not meet the criteria for any remedial work. And so we've submitted that to Department of Ecology to get their concurrence, and I'd just like to submit that for the record.
Okay, so we would make that exhibit 23, I believe, at this point, and Riley Group, who I believe did perform your original soils report for infiltration, if I recall correctly. Is that right?
That's correct.
They've now looked at the dirt again, as it were, looked at the soil, and but this time they did it specifically to check on this Asarco problem from up north, but with an eye to ensuring that, you know, no major muckda, no major remedial measures need to occur. And
that's correct. Yeah, the original geotech work would have been a deeper a deeper dive into the soils to support the stormwater design, and the arsenic and lead stuff all happens in the top 12 inches or so. So it's a different level of testing. Do you want us to pull those up, or can we just submit those? I mean, we're prepared to put them on the screen if we want to, but
no need. What I would suggest, make sure they get sent to the city, with Reese, Fant, and others there, whoever you're working with over there, but they'll ensure that I get it. But I believe number 23 is the number, Reese. Is that right? Yeah. So we'll make the December 7th new soils report related to the MD&S from the Riley Group, but we'll make that exhibit 23. Okay.
Exhibit 24 could be, the next item is a critical areas report that EnviroVector performed, dated September 8th, 2022. The report just concludes that there are no critical areas on the property. When I say critical areas, I'm referring not to the Oaks, but rather wetlands, floodplains, streams, that type of thing. The closest wetland was noted as being like 443 feet to the northeast of the site. And so we'll just submit that to complete the record. Critical areas report dated September 8th, 2022.
And I thought I had, well, if I don't have it, happy to include it. I definitely recall something telling me I had multiple reports from EnviroVector, but maybe it was, no, I guess I didn't have that particular one. I had the Oregon White Oak Management Plan and the Mazama screening report, but I guess I didn't have the critical area. So happy to include it. And you said that was from September of 22, is that right?
Correct, September 8th.
Okay, it's my older brother's birthday. All right, and that's the critical areas report from EnviroVector. We'll make 24, and I understand what you're saying in terms of no critical areas, meaning we're not talking about these oaks, the trees. We're talking about all the other potential critical areas. So no steep slopes, no wetlands, etc. Got it. Okay.
The next item. So as Mr. Christensen noted, we had collaborated, Chloe had collaborated with city staff on stormwater design, and the stormwater report that made it into the exhibit list was actually an older version. So there was a newer one that we should include into the record. It's a report dated September 18th, 2023. And then the sort of the companion document would be the preliminary civil plan, which includes those stormwater elements. I would suggest that could be exhibit 25 and then 26 for the plans. It's got the same date, September 18th, 2023. So then you could, Doug, you could confirm that, but I think that you'll find that to be correct.
And I'm happy to have Doug Christensen confirm that, but the idea being that there's a slightly newer version of the stormwater report that would be included as Exhibit 25, and then the updated civil plans in relation to that, both dated September 18 of this year, 2023. That would be 25 and 26. But Mr. Christensen, can you confirm that those should be included in your mind?
Yes, I believe the date is correct. I know there was a new report in that time period. I can't say for sure that it was the 18th, but I know it probably was. It was right in that time period.
Sure, and just for you, Mr. Pantier, my understanding, as I was trying to fumble through and explain my understanding of stormwater on site, was I close? I mean, there's no major changes that are between, I guess, the June report that I looked at and the September report, and is, to the best of your knowledge,
I can speak to that. Swear me in.
We're gonna get to a more detailed, deeper dive on stormwater with Chloe when we get to that, if you want.
Well, do you want to do that later? That's fine. Why don't you finish, Mr. Pantier, and I'll let you direct traffic on your team. So,
yeah.
Okay. But I am going to admit 25 and 26 as discussed,
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
So briefly, just a recap. So this is subdivision of 32 acres into 179 single-family lots. These will all be detached homes as opposed to townhomes or some other form of single-family. The density is about 5.5 units per acre, which is just under the maximum of 6 units per acre. We do have a companion planned residential development application that's going in with this. The only reason for the PRD, like Mr. Fant mentioned, is just to provide some flexibility in design. These lot sizes are somewhat smaller than what would otherwise be required by the standard zoning code. The trade-off for that is an abundance of open space. Additional open space has been provided. So the 179 lots have been clustered on, you might say, a little smaller footprint of land because the open space is much larger than otherwise required. The lot sizes, the smallest lot would be 2,700 square feet. All other zoning requirements will be met, and no density bonus is being requested with this planned residential development. The open space is comprised of over 10 acres, which represents 32% of the gross site area. Each lot will be served by City of Lacey sanitary sewer and water with extensions from the existing systems in Marvin and Stillicum Road. Each lot will be accessed by public or private streets and alleys. Sidewalks will be installed along each side of all of the public streets throughout the subdivision and along one side of the private street designated as Tract H. There's one short private street in the northwest corner of the plat that serves three lots. Stormwater will be managed through a series of water quality and filtration systems throughout the subdivision. We'll talk more about that here in a minute with Chloe. We have one minor edit to the, we have a couple items in the staff report. So on page 2, this is super minor, but on page 2 where it talks about access.
Let me pull it back up. Sorry, one sec, Mr. Panther. I just want to make sure I'm following here. All right, so you're saying things you noticed in the staff report, which has been included as Exhibit 2 in the record, but you're saying on page 2 of the staff report, you wanted to point something out, correct?
Yeah, if you scroll down to where it says access.
I see it. Yep.
The statement says that the access off of Stillicum Road is located where the existing access into the historic mushroom farm facility was, but it's close to that, but not quite. The access is actually aligned with the regional athletic complex access to the south, and so I just wanted to make that note that it is a little different, but it's aligned with the athletic complex.
Okay, so the access off of Stillicum, which is a major road, well, maybe not as major as Marvin, but which is to the west, I think, right? But essentially, there's been an intent to actually change the access so that we have a proper, what's the word I'm looking for?
Alignment. I mean,
Thank you. A proper alignment. I'll let Mr. Fink weigh in later, but you get what I was saying. The idea being that this shouldn't have any impact on any of the proposed conditions. You were just clarifying more for my sake than anything. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so access from Stillicum slightly different than currently exists, but will different than currently exists, but will achieve proper alignment with development to south. Okay, got that.
We have two conditions in the Actually, let's see, we've got two conditions in the staff report. Condition number 57 and 77
Right, hold on.
that we would like to propose slightly different wording language to reflect our understanding of what the condition should be. So Chloe's put it up on the screen. We're happy to. Oh, we'll share it. Let's share this so everybody can see it.
I have no issue with it being shared. Just to be clear, though, for those that may be watching, staff has recommended conditions were I to approve the project. There's 100 something. These are, again, recommendations that have been made by staff. Ultimately, I, the hearing examiner, am the one that sort of is on the hook and needs to, you know, determine what conditions are appropriate. And there's a line of cases called Nolan Dolan, and I have to ensure that any conditions that have been recommended are appropriate based on development being that is being proposed. So these two conditions, it looks like the applicant is recommending there be slight alterations to the conditions that have been proposed. I would suggest, if everyone's okay with this, I'm not even going to suggest, I'm just going to say, why don't we do this? I would say, let's make this exhibit 27. 26, I think, was the civil plans, but we can make exhibit 27 the applicant's proposed alterations to staff's recommended conditions. So with that, does that make sense, Mr. Pantier? I'm proposing it be included in the record as an exhibit so that rather than me try to rewrite it and then give staff an opportunity, and I want to give them an opportunity to speak to it. So happy to have it back on the screen, by the way. If you want to speak to, or we at the point where you're going to have whoever on your team wants to speak to it, what the thought is on why changes seem appropriate.
Yeah, let's go ahead and put it up on the screen, Chloe. And then I think if I could, I'm going to pass the keys to the bus over to Chloe and let her talk a little bit about 57 and 77. 77 deals with overhead power, and 57 deals with stormwater. And Chloe, why don't you give some overview on why we propose these modifications?
Great, and I'll get you sworn in. Thank you. Do you swear affirm to tell the truth and testimony you give here today?
I do.
And if you could just state and spell your name for the recording.
Chloe McIntyre, that's CHLOEMCINTYRE.
Thank you. And the I lowercase, uppercase.
Capital.
So MC capital I and MC capital INTYRE. Is that right?
Correct.
Excellent. Thank you for being here. Go right ahead.
All right, so condition 57 relates to the roof drain runoff. As it was written, the condition states that roof drain runoff will be infiltrated in individual lot infiltration trenches. That is not what we suggested with our preliminary design, and the lots don't really allow for that due to their size. We had planned for roof runoff to go to these regional facilities. Regardless, the runoff from these roofs would comply with core requirement 5, lid technologies. So we would still be meeting the intent of the stormwater design manual.
Sure. Okay. So on that note, and we can go back, we'll go back to staff later, but essentially the idea is the originally proposed condition is quite a bit more specific, and it actually references buildings, might have been something, but point being, this specifically and explicitly references the brand new state-of-the-art 2022 best of the best stormwater manual that Mr. Christensen is rightly proud of. And the idea being that any roof drain runoff will comply with the requirements of the new manual in relation to low impact development and LID and all that. So
Right.
it's okay, understood.
Yeah, that's our intent with that rewrite, is to just comply with the manual, not pigeonhole us into trenches where we cannot do that.
Understood entirely. Okay,
Uh,
and Lisa?
I was gonna go to condition 77. So as that condition is written, it states that all overhead utilities must be relocated underground. There are high transmission power lines, at least on the Stillicum Road frontage, and those cannot be undergrounded per PSC. They will not allow that. So I'd like to add a little more flexibility to that condition as well. Where we can underground power, we will. But on other projects where we've been required to keep high transmission lines and the power poles, we've been able to raise distribution lines as needed and just underground communication lines. So I'm looking for a little more flexibility in undergrounding those overhead utilities on the frontage.
Sure, and there, just to be clear, this condition is intended, and your understanding is the applicant, and if the city's understanding is different, I want to be real clear about this, but the idea is this is a condition related to frontage improvements, i.e. the improvements that occur on the sidewalk, kind of, in this instance, I believe it would be just on Marvin on the east side and Stillicum on the south side. But the idea is these are the sort of the frontage in front of the development itself, you know, and if there was pre-existing overhead power lines, what had been suggested in the condition was that those be undergrounded, but you're pointing out that in light of there being some high voltage lines, there may not be the possibility to do so based on agreements that already exist with Puget Sound Energy. This is not totally rare in this area of the state. There are some very high voltage lines related to dams to the south and hydroelectric, et cetera. But is that the basic concept, Ms. McIntyre, that you want to ensure that?
Yeah, this is just specific to the frontage improvements on Marvin and Stilcombe Road. Where we cannot underground, we do not want that to be a condition that we have to. And we would like a little flexibility where we have to keep poles that we might be able to keep power lines above ground, including the lower voltage distribution lines.
Sure, and I understand the point entirely, and we're going to make this, you know, one of the. I've already determined this should be an exhibit. I think we do have an engineer on city staff that maybe can speak to it. I think I saw him earlier, but just to see if they wanted to weigh in on this particular concept. But before we go there, Ms. McIntyre, did you want to speak to other issues? I know you're kind of engineering expert, stormwater expert.
Yeah, I can provide a little overview of the stormwater now.
Let's do it.
Good.
So this site will infiltrate 100% of stormwater from the disturbed areas of the site. Where we are not proposing to disturb the site, we will not be changing the runoff. Runoff from the disturbed areas of the site will go to bioretention cells for treatment and infiltration of that initial storm. Where the storm event exceeds the capacity of those infiltration cells, it'll overflow into infiltration ponds for the remainder of that runoff to be infiltrated. That's with an exception in the southeast corner. We only have a bioretention cell, so that will provide both treatment and flow control for the entire basin. This project will meet core requirement 5 criteria for the LID performance standard. 100 or up to a minimum of 91% of stormwater runoff from the site will be treated in these infiltration bioretention cells before the remainder goes into the infiltration ponds. We are doing groundwater monitoring on site now over this wet season. And we do have additional infiltration testing scheduled for this wet season to verify our infiltration rates prior to our final designs. The newer report from September did include some additional geotechnical survey of the soils that we're targeting with these infiltration facilities. So Riley Group went out and got additional soil samples in our target soils for each of these facilities to do a grain size analysis for preliminary rates. So that wouldn't be used for the final design, but it was just to get a sense of what we might have by the time we actually get our pits done. And all of these cells and infiltration ponds, with an exception of the northeast pond, had design infiltration rates of 20 inches per hour. The northeast pond had a design infiltration rate of 9 inches per hour. So the updated reports reflect that.
Okay.
I can't think of anything else I need to touch on with storm unless you have any questions.
Well, just a less specific one, which is that, you know, the community to the north, I believe, is the one that several members expressed concern about the potential for water, you know, stormwater impacts.
Right. This project does not create more water. So the same amount of rain that's falling there now is going to continue to fall there, but improvements will be made to the stormwater, as in they're not very well functioning facilities on Ostrom's now. With this development, we're going to capture and collect and store the modeled 100% simulated stormwater runoff. So runoff from this site will be reduced with this development, and it will improve any flooding conditions downstream.
Thank you. I don't need you to explain the entirety of how you look at it pre-development before there was a farm back in the you know, Jurassic age, but you're essentially saying that there should be no detrimental impacts, increased impacts. If anything, there should be reduced impacts on neighboring property, especially to the north.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I think that covered what I had in terms of questions, but anything else, Ms. McIntyre, you wanted to touch on there?
I can't think of anything.
Okay. I was gonna check on Tom Stiles briefly, unless you had another plan in mind, Mr. Pantier. I just thought while we were talking about these power lines, but I think he's probably the person to ask if we can hop to him real quick.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, Mr. Stiles, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth in testimony you give here today?
I do.
And if you could state and spell your name and explain your role at the City of Lacey.
Yeah, my name is Tom Stiles, TOM STILES, and I'm the Development Review Manager.
Thank you. And happy to hear if you have other thoughts beyond what we were just talking about, but the initial thought had to do with that proposed condition, in particular related to overhead power and undergrounding it. And I'm particularly attuned to this issue because in your neighboring jurisdiction of Tumwater, there was actually an appeal that occurred related to this exact issue. So it is certainly something I think about, but your thoughts on, is the city amenable to changing that recommended condition, or you see some reason why it ought not to be changed? I will let you speak.
Okay. Yeah, so I think Chloe summed it up very well. I mean, so we're talking about condition 77. And when we have high power, overhead power, we have allowed that to remain above ground. As Chloe said, to underground it, it's very expensive, and we have it throughout the city. So we don't have any, I looked at the revision, and I agree with the revision that she wrote. She did say something though, whenever she was doing the explanation about lower voltage ones remaining, and I might want to have a little bit more conversation on that. Usually what we see is we see the low voltage, and we see Comcast, CenturyLink, or anything else that is above ground gets undergrounded. And so anyway.
And the thought I had was I don't want to say we're getting to the weeds because this is important in terms of the hearing examiner and, you know, I need to produce a decision and these conditions become kind of binding. So I want to make sure that there aren't things folks ultimately have misunderstandings or disagreements about, unless anyone would object. I almost would say I would keep what I proposed as a placeholder, which I said Exhibit 27 was the applicant's proposed alterations. I would say if needed, Mr. Christensen, but also Mr. Stiles can work with Ms. McIntyre and Mr. Pantier here in the next day or two, and then provide Exhibit 27 as a agreed upon revised two conditions, as opposed to an applicant proposed conditions. I think that would maybe be the best course of action, as it would then very clearly ensure that everyone knows that the city and the applicant both thought, again, this is assuming I approve the project. I haven't actually made a determination, but do you understand kind of where I'm coming from, Mr. Stiles? Does that make sense in your mind?
It does.
And
But the way it's written, the way she has it written right now, we can agree with 77 as it is written. So,
well, I guess my only thing is then you said, oh, but what about this other issue? I guess I just,
yes,
if it needs to be slightly augmented to capture the back and forth that has not fully occurred. Well, let me ask Mr. Pantier, your thoughts on some further kind of having an exhibit that clearly captures and ensures that there's an agreed change to the proposed conditions between the applicant. And I'm not saying we leave the record open for weeks on end here. I'm saying you can get it to me tomorrow. I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, I would
that-
prefer to have a concise agreement between the applicant and the city, and so we would work with Tom Stiles and get that final agreed upon condition number 77 back into the record no later than close of business tomorrow, being Friday, December 15th.
Perfect. And I suppose that would also include the other change in the condition, which I think Mr. Christensen has already signed off on, but I just want to make sure that the record clearly reflects that both have changed. Doug is nodding. I think he had no problem with that change in condition, but that way it's very clear in the record. Does that track?
We're good with that. That'll happen at the close of this hearing before the close of business tomorrow.
Excellent. Okay, Mr. Stiles, then anything further in your realm of expertise you wanted to touch on based on what you've heard today?
no, everything sounds great.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you so much for your thoughts and for being here. So I'll go back to Mr. Pantier. So unless Ms. McIntyre had anything further she wanted to touch on, I was going to see if you had other members of your team you intended to have me hear from before we see if there are members of the public.
I just have a couple more comments and then I'll close and we'll get the public on.
Excellent. Go ahead.
So I want to touch briefly on the kind of the overall project design and open space in particular. I mentioned that there's over 30% open space allocated to the project. That open space will serve a number of different elements or activities. I'll just say that there's been a focus, number one, on preservation of oak trees. So this project was specifically designed to preserve as many oak trees as absolutely possible. Most of the oak trees occur on the north and east sides of the property. And you'll see based on the site plan that that's where the majority of that open space has been programmed in. Also, that open space has been not only serves the purpose of preserving oak trees, but it also provides for a nice buffer to these established neighborhoods to the north and to the east, the Hawks Ridge development to the north and the Mobile Home Park to the east. Very generous buffers. Those will be forested buffers, highly vegetated areas between the developed portion of Morel Meadows and those existing developments. We've programmed an active recreation area in the central part of the plat. That also was intentional in an effort to provide a convenient location so that all of the future homeowners within this subdivision will have good access to enjoy that amenity for the subdivision. There'll be extensive landscaping throughout all of the disturbed areas of the site, including the frontages along Stillicum and Marvin Roads and in and around the stormwater management facilities. A trail network will be provided throughout Tract A. Tract A is the large natural area. There would be a low impact type pathway system that would be implemented throughout that area, thinking not hardscape, but rather more like bark or wood chips or that type of thing, more of a nature trail.
And sorry to interrupt. On that note, Mr. Panther, just looking at the sort of plan, I know that Tract H is intended on providing driveway access, I believe, to 109, 110, 111, those lots. And then there's a couple other spots off the internal road to the north. Is the idea that potentially anything like a trail would be how folks get to it? You're not going through people's backyards, right? I mean, it's
No, you're right. There's opportunity. There'll be a sidewalk on one side of Tract H. And so that will connect with the trail system. There's an opportunity between lots 129 and 128. And so there will be no encroachment into the actual yards or the lots. Everything would be interconnected to the street system.
Sure, but that was I guess in a way I wanted to ensure that we're not losing the opportunity for Tract H to also provide that connection, because otherwise, if you live in the neighborhood, if I'm a kid on my bike and I want to get over there, it's not only on the east side that I can potentially go get to where those trails are. Not that I'm going to ride my bike up there, but I'm just saying am I understanding multiple access points is the idea, correct?
Your understanding is accurate.
Okay.
So are you able to put the colored site plan up?
That's what I'm looking at while we talk, so.
Oh, okay, cool. So on the colored plat map, there is whoops.
Okay.
Chloe's a lot better at this than I am with this technical stuff, so she's in charge of the mouse. Hold on.
There we go.
That's the civil.
Well, I'll talk while she tries to find it. But if you have the colored plat map, you'll see that there we go. So there's lots that are colored in yellow, and then there's lots colored in orange.
Sure.
The lots colored in orange are what we call rear loaded or alley loaded lots, and the yellow are traditional front loaded lots. The alley loaded lots are 30 feet wide, which would provide for a 20-foot wide building envelope for the house. Those are all detached, so they'll all have 5-foot side yard setbacks. And so we will incorporate, as part of the design of the homes, this is probably a little separate than what we would show on a preliminary plat, but when we get to the final plat, we will incorporate reciprocal side yard easements into all these lots that are colored in orange. That's provided under chapter 14.23.072 of the Lacey Municipal Code. And so sometimes people call them Z lots or zero lot line lots. They're not going to be zero lot line in the sense that the house will be resting on the property line, but rather they'll have a shared side yard. There'll be an area on the side yard that'll provide for some private yard area for each lot. And so one lot will give up their side yard for the benefit of the adjacent lot and on down the line. So instead of having 2 5-foot side yards, you'll end up with a 10 or 12-foot wide side yard.
So I guess just to touch on the concept, we don't have townhomes, meaning that they're shared walls. But what you're saying is essentially for these orange color, the ones that are this sort of burnt umber color, essentially you're gonna have it sort of, if I started at 101, that might be right on the street, and then the next set would be 199. The homes are a bit closer together. 98 and 97 are close together, such that maybe I counted it wrong, but the idea being that we're not sharing, walls, but the idea being that you're creating kind of gaps in groups of 2 throughout, so that there's shared yard space between some of these. Am I misunderstanding or understanding? Maybe I misspoke.
Yeah, probably not quite. I mean, it's
I messed up. All right, go ahead and clarify for me.
Yeah, it's a 30-foot wide lot, and so you imagine there's a 20-foot house centered on that 30-foot lot, and every home will be like that. And so if you did not do a reciprocal side yard easement, then every single home would have a 5-foot side yard, which is not very usable. And so instead, we're going to do a reciprocal easement on every lot so that each lot will have a 10 or 12-foot wide side yard usable space rather than 2 5-foot side yards.
Okay, now that clarified it for me. Thank you. So the idea being that the homes are actually centered in the middle of the lot. What happens in terms of, the easements that nobody will really see? I mean, the idea being that I can't fence off my neighbor potentially because they have access for a shared space. Is that kind of the right way to think about it?
Yep, that's exactly the intent of 1423-072.
Understood. Thank you for clarifying. But 100%, we're not in townhomes, just to be clear.
Absolutely. Yeah, no
Okay.
townhomes.
No, I didn't think so. I just wanted to make sure I didn't misunderstand. So I think you clarified, and despite my muddling things up, I think I've understood. So thank you for clarifying further.
A couple other items. We've already talked about traffic. This site had a mushroom manufacturing facility, so essentially there is no transportation impacts because the AM and PM peak trip counts are extremely close to what this development will generate. So the net effect is basically 0 regional transportation impacts. We already talked about the pocket gophers. There were 3 screenings done a month apart, and there were no evidence of pocket gophers on the site or habitat thereof. So that report is already part of the record. The Oregon white oak they were inventoried by EnviroVector, and then, as you pointed out, Sound Urban Forestry critiqued those recommendations and agreed with the conditions. Essentially, we're preserving the majority of the oaks, the large quantity of oaks in those areas that I talked about before on the north and east sides of the project. And as mitigation for the oaks that will have to be removed to accommodate the development, there's areas of invasive plant or species that are not native to Oregon white oak woodlands. And so those are noted in the report by EnviroVector. Basically, the area is located north of lots, in the area of 120 to 128 or so. And those invasive species will be removed and replaced with a native plant that that'll work in concert with the oak woodlands.
And
That's all I have on that. If you have a
sure.
question.
Those just out of sometimes tracks like tract A, for instance, end up these open space tracks, and if it was in the many conditions and I missed it, I apologize, but they end up getting put in to some kind of protection area in perpetuity. I know that this is not technically a critical area. I know that there's stormwater being addressed and dealt with in this particular area, but is there a mechanism in place to ensure that future development beyond the scope of the lots proposed won't occur? Is that been accounted for to the best of your knowledge?
Yeah, thank you for that. So as part of the development, there will be a owners association established. And that owner association will be tasked with not just the maintenance and the ownership of the land that's common ownership, like tract A and B and C and the private road tract H. All of those will be owned and maintained by the owners association. And within that document, there will be provisions on what needs to be done to not just maintain and manage the stormwater management facilities, but also the oak habitat areas and the private roads and the playground and the community, all of the community areas. There'll be information within the declaration of CCRs that will guide the owners association to management of all those amenities.
Okay. And sorry,
Go ahead.
I'll interrupt all the time. My understanding, and clarify if you have a different understanding, is that, with a private development that does have CCNRs and a homeowners association, whereby those folks are tasked with maintaining these stormwater facilities in particular, if they're negligent or not taking care of that, your understanding, or at least my understanding, clarify if I'm wrong, is that the city, there's a mechanism or mechanisms by which the city is able to sort of take over and fix the problem and bill the HOA if needed. Or do you have a different understanding of if worse came to worse? Not that we want this to happen, but.
Yeah, I haven't seen that happen or implemented much, or if any, but that's my understanding, is that they have the ability to come in and take over if there's things not being done and levy fines, but I haven't seen that.
Never on one of your projects. I just want to make sure that you understood the legal implications. I think we're on the same page. So I'll let you, I think hopefully about done.
I've got two more items.
All right.
You had a question about the tax accounts. Along about the area, the back of lots 11 through 22, there's a section line. That's a surveying terminology, but there's a section line that runs north-south through that green space and probably right in the back of lot 20 of the Hawks Ridge development. You can almost see a faint line there. That's a section line. And so the Thurston County assessor set a separate tax account up for the sliver of ground that lies in the other section, which is east of that line.
Is that 11, not 11 to 22, is that easternmost set of
Yep.
proposed? So it's all the same strip of land. There's not another area of land that is. I ask because there's in various documents, I recognize some are older and some address different things. There were some variations, but to the best of what I'm looking at, I think it's 32.08, I think, acres. And it's what I'm looking at on the screen here, correct? No matter if it's two tax parcels or one tax parcel.
That's correct.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
This will be a phased development. If you look at the colored plan, you'll see a kind of a heavy dashed dotted line that delineates the phasing. I'll just note that all of the open space, based on this phasing plan, all of the open space is being dedicated as part of the first phase. So the second phase is primarily just the island in the central part of the project right there. Yeah, thank you, Chloe.
Sure, and just to clarify that point, the intent is that there will be 2 phases, but you're saying that the dedication of mostly what is tract A and tract B, which is the open space, but also the playground, as it were, which is tract, I can't read it, it's too small, but is that C or G? I can't tell. Where what looks like to be the ball field.
Yeah, the intent is to dedicate all of the perimeter open space, tract A and B, and then the playground. We hope to also incorporate that into phase 1. Right now, this plat map shows that as phase 2. So that's the only element that's actually in phase 2, but I'll let Ray Lynn speak to that if she would like to include that in phase 1. Right now, it's shown as phase 2.
Well, I'm happy to hear from Raylan Holquist in just a sec, but I want to be clear in terms of phasing the basic infrastructure. Is there phasing of infrastructure as opposed to when lots are put together? And if that's something that Raylan Holquist should speak to, I'm happy to hear from her.
Yeah, all of the infrastructure, the streets, the stormwater, the sewer, the water, all of that will be installed within each respective phase. So the lots will be served by streets and sewer and water in each of the 2 phases.
Okay, why don't we hear from Raylan Holquist, because that answers the one that makes me more nervous than the other answers. So we'll get Raylan Holquist sworn in on behalf of thank you. Do you swear affirm to tell the truth in any testimony you give here today?
I do.
And if you could spell your name for the record, please.
Yes, Raylyn Hulquist, Raelyn, Hulquist, Hulquist. I'm a project manager with DR Horton.
Thank you for being here.
Yes, our intent is to phase the development in so much as the recording of the final plats goes. So we will not stop the construction of the infrastructure. Our idea is that we would continue all of the infrastructure, get all of the storm detention in, all of the water and sewer in, and then make sure that we've got adequate health, safety, welfare for the fire protection and all of that, and then get to a point where we could record the first phase adequate with the city's requirements. And then with us having the trail in tract A, that I'm assuming, we'll work with the city, make sure they're good with that for the open space requirements. If we don't have the park completed in tract G by that point, depending upon weather and that sort of thing.
Okay, so that actually sounded different than what I just heard. Are you saying something slightly different than what I just heard from Mr. Pantier? Because it sounded like what you were just saying was essentially that all of the infrastructure will be put in place. And I don't mean the open space, the park itself. I just mean the stormwater facilities, the roads, the potential connections for sewage, cable, etc., electricity. And then phase 1 can go in at that point, and then potentially phase 2, then maybe the park gets done. But am I misunderstanding, or please help me understand?
So we will construct the infrastructure in such a way so that we are allowed to record each phase independently, depending upon weather and the timing of the year. So we've got a road network that allows for connectivity and circulation to satisfy all fire and public health, safety, and welfare. So whenever we phase developments, our typical process is to ensure that all the infrastructure is in for each phase independent.
And maybe, well, now it sounds like we're back to where we were. I guess maybe I'm just, is there a better plan set we could have Ms. McIntyre pull up than this one, that maybe just the preliminary one? Okay, so I am struggling to understand where phase one ends and phase two begins.
Can you zoom in, Chloe, a little bit?
Hopefully.
Probably be here to look at it on the colored one. It's probably less busy.
Well,
my mouse is being funny. So 1 minute.
okay. Well, maybe if you could just describe, clearly phase one is a lot of the southern portion. Where does phase two begin and end? And I can look more closely on my own materials.
Trace the line around, just trace that line around.
So we have this line. This. So this is phase two.
The
northern portion.
Yeah, but this is phase one.
Tract A.
Yes.
Including both those stormwater management systems in the northeast and northwest.
Right.
Oh, okay. Okay. Based on that, I'm far less concerned. So essentially, I think I get it. And Raylan Oakwest, you'll understand my concern, and I know working for a larger developer than sometimes you see. The idea being you don't want, or I don't want to approve something in phases wherein
of course
all the homes get built or a bunch of them get built before the infrastructure is in place. And so you can assure and affirm that, the way that this is being proposed, Tract A and the infrastructure related to stormwater would be ready to go. You might not build the loop road in terms of the actual, northern part of the road.
That's right.
Until phase two, but
that's right.
Phase one will ensure that however 101 or so homes, I think it would be, have all the infrastructure needed to be fully lived in, as it were, or maybe not lived in, but you get where I'm going there.
Accessible, correct.
So,
Yes.
and not only that, Tract A is sort of set aside as needed, and the stormwater detention that's proposed up in that direction has been addressed.
Exactly correct.
We're on the same page. I'm good then. That said, though, I do have a technical question about phasing, and if you know the answer or don't, I ask this because maybe it's less of a problem now, but back in, 2010, when the economy tanked, and the state legislature changed how many years folks had to do a plat, phasing became particularly important to the extent that technically under the law, and I think under state law, but in a lot of jurisdictions, if you propose phased development, you can actually end up having a longer allowable period of time in which to develop your proposal than otherwise. I don't believe the applicant is asking for that here, but is this making sense?
It does make sense, but we are not, in this case, we are not asking for that. Yes.
Okay. Okay, there's enough demand that you're not worried.
Correct.
You don't need
housing is definitely in demand right now. There's a shortage for certain.
Okay, the phasing thing, those are the two issues I bring up with phasing, which is one, ensuring that the phases line up with the infrastructure, and two, does it change the ask in terms of how long? And you're saying that yes and no in terms of the ask.
Understood. Yep.
Anything further on behalf of your team, as it were?
I don't believe so. I think we've covered a lot this morning.
I think we have, yeah.
You would just ask for approval. I think we've covered everything and are code compliant.
Excellent. Okay, thank you so much. So back to Mr. Pantier momentarily. Did that then conclude, Mr. Pantier, before we go to the public?
Yeah, I think with the conditions, recommended conditions of approval as presented by staff, numbers 1 through 11. Of course, with the exception of potential changes to condition 57 and 77, the applicant believes that that the findings of 5817-110 are met. Thank you.
You cut out when you said 1 through, it sounded like 1 through 11, and I went, no, 111, but okay, we're on the same page. So appreciate it, thank you. So at this point, what we'll do is we'll see, we have enabled the raise hand feature, and I know there are some folks in attendance. And so if anyone that is in attendance would like to testify in relation to this proposal, now would be your opportunity. So if you are interested in testifying, please enable or use that raise hand feature. That said, one of these is might be a phone. I don't know if they're able to, but yeah, I mean, use the raise hand feature, but give it a moment. And I do recognize one name as someone that provided comments through the written process. Okay, so someone identified as Motorola Moto G has their hand raised. So if we can allow them, or if we have to bring them over, that's fine. Hi, who might this be? You might need to unmute yourself. The person on the Motorola, as it were.
Hi, this is Dana. I'm in the Hawks Ridge homeowners neighborhood right next door to the Ostrom's farm.
Okay, so you want to testify, so I'm going to swear you in, okay?
Okay.
Do you swear affirm to tell the truth in any testimony you give here today?
Yes.
And if you could just state your name and then spell it for me.
Dana Stensby, it's D-A-N-A. Stensby is S-T as in Tom, E-N-S-B-Y.
S-T-E-N-S-B-Y, is that right?
Correct.
Thank you so much for being here. Go right ahead.
So I'd like to disagree with the traffic on Marvin. It has gotten worse, and I don't know where adding another 170 houses is going to make it any better. Is there going to be another light put to that exit onto Marvin Road going out of this complex? Is that going to add another light to our Marvin Road street now? And then as far as the trees, if some of those are going to be removed, that's going to remove a lot of the sound barriers. Is there just going to be a wood fence put up, or are we going to get one of those nice concrete walls to mitigate the sound now to having another 170 houses right next door to us? We've had issues already with a apartment complex towards the north of our area where they put in housing and they took down all the trees. So now those homeowners just see lights and apartments out their backyards, where we have a nice area of trees that we are able to look at.
Sure. So just so I understand your concerns, Dana Stensby, you were wondering, because you are concerned about traffic on Marvin, you're wondering if there's any plan for a light either directly in relation to the ingress egress from the neighborhood, the in out of this neighborhood. Is that question one?
Correct. Yes. If I go to leave my neighborhood on a Saturday morning, you're lucky if you can get out to be able to turn, because there's a bus stop there. And the way the lights work, that traffic, you either have to go straight across through Tanglewild to be able to get anywhere to Martin, or you have to turn and go down towards Nisqually or that Stillicum Street to get anywhere out of our neighborhood, because you can't turn right out of our neighborhood.
And you're in Hawks Ridge to the north. Sorry to interrupt. You're in Hawks Ridge, which is to the north. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so that was the first thing, and then the second concern you raised, I believe, had to do with the call it the space between the proposed neighborhood that'll be to the south with the strand of Gary Oaks, what we've been calling Tract A. I don't know if on the device you have that if you've been able to see what's going on, but it's shown up as that green area between the lots in this proposed neighborhood and then your neighborhood, I believe, to the north. Your question though was when you get to the property line, is there a fence or something proposed, or potentially a retaining wall, a concrete wall, a sound barrier of some kind? And the major concern is ensuring that, you know, both aesthetically, visually, and noise wise, that there's, you know, no major impacts on your neighborhood. Is that an accurate
That's
assessment?
correct. Yes.
Excellent. I'll try to get what answers I can. And I don't need you to provide your email out loud on a public forum. If you haven't been in contact with Reese Fant or city staff, I'm going to have Reese give his email out loud on a public forum, because I would strongly suggest you email him because I didn't recognize your name. If you did comment, I apologize for not remembering. It's been a long morning already previously, but I would suggest if you email Reese Fant, he'll make sure you get a copy of my decision once it's produced so you can keep abreast of what's happening. So Reese, can you tell everyone what your email is?
Yeah, of course. So my email is going to be rfant, so R, F as in Frank, ANT, at ci.lacy.wa.us.
Okay, so Dana Sinsby, hopefully you got that. And I'm going to see if anyone else wanted to testify, and then I'll try to get any kind of answer if there is one that is able to be provided. But thank you for taking the time to participate. Truly appreciate it. Okay.
Yeah, and I just have one more question. So
Oh,
we are
okay.
on a sewer monitoring program through the city that was supposed to end after 10 years, but now it's going on a lifetime. If sewer is now being brought into this area, since we can't mitigate or go onto Marvin Road because they can't have a sewer down a highway, are we then going to link into the sewer in this neighborhood and hook up to the Stillicum sewer line?
This is a great question, and I'll tell you, beyond the scope of what I'm being asked to address, but that's why you should definitely email Reese, because what Reese can do is probably connect you with Tom Stiles or Doug Christensen. They're at the city that might be able to give you better information specific to an issue like that. I'm not saying I'm not an engineer, but this is not the forum where I think we'll be able to get an answer. But if you're in contact with Mr. Fant, he'll ensure that you are in touch with the right folks that can hopefully give you that information. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then the lot size changed just because they wanted more increase in housing in this area?
Sorry, what was the
lot size for housing, did that change because we wanted to mitigate more housing in this area?
Well, so just to be clear, and then we're going to move on, but the applicant has requested what's called a PRD, or a planned residential development, and what it means is that they're allowed to have slightly smaller lots so that they can actually preserve more open space, but they haven't actually they're not seeking to increase density, so they're not putting in more homes that would be allowed. In fact, you know, probably beyond what I'm allowed to say as the hearing examiner, but my understanding of the project is by doing this, it would allow for more, a bigger buffer and preservation of more of those Gary Oaks to the north, and your neighborhood is beyond them to the north. So it's not more homes than would be allowed otherwise. It's smaller lots allow for protection of bigger buffers for trees and open space, but not more homes. So that hopefully makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to advocate here. I'm just trying to explain my own understanding of the position. So hopefully that helped. So are we all set? I think we're gonna wrap up here
Thank
shortly.
you.
but really appreciate it. So please reach out to Mr. Fan. And then the only other name was Patty Madison, who I know had, I believe, provided public comment, written comment, and didn't hit the raise hand feature, but just wanted to wait a sec to ensure whether or not they wanted to participate before turning back to others to conclude the hearing. Okay, well, there were a couple quick questions, and I think one of them had to do with a specific question about traffic in Marvin and whether a light was being proposed. And then the other one had to do with call it the buffer and the barrier, as it were, to the north between this and Hawks Ridge. So, Mr. Pantier, why don't I go to you first and see if you have someone in particular you wanted to have speak to these issues, and
well, I think as far as the traffic, I guess the two questions are traffic and a light. I'm not aware of any plans for signal or new traffic light along Marvin Road. The project itself does not trigger a traffic signal. As we stated in the earlier testimony, the impacts on traffic are actually less. That doesn't mean that that Marvin Road doesn't have a lot of cars on it, but it's a state route, so that's expected. As far as the fence and the wall, I think I'll turn that back over to Raylyn Hultquist and let her respond to that. I will just, well, at any rate, I'll just hand it over to you, Raylyn.
okay, Ms. Hultquist.
Hi. Yeah, at this point, I'm not certain that we know for sure what we're doing along that north boundary. We may, I know that there are some fences along that north line right now from those neighbors in Hawks Ridge. So we are evaluating that at this time. We've not closed on this property yet. So once we conclude this hearing and get our decision, we'll be moving to close, and then we'll be making those final decisions. But oftentimes I can say that we will fence the boundary of properties with wood fencing.
Sure, and for a neighbor to the north that might be interested in staying up to date on what's going on, if that, if they reach out and are on the list, as it were, the notification list through Reese Fan, the city, would they sort of be able to stay abreast of what's going on, or is there another contact point that you'd like to provide? I'm not requiring this. I'm just saying if.
Sure, Reese knows how to get a hold of me, and I'm very happy to share that. He can share that my contact information. That's fine.
Great, thank you. Okay, and then with that, I'm going to go. Sorry, Jeff Pantier, anything further?
No, I'm done. I'm good.
Okay, I'm going to end. I believe the intent for me would be to end with Reese Fantz to see if, on behalf of the city, he has anything further. I do point out we're going to leave the record open through tomorrow, just for purposes of this one minor issue of the agreed upon condition that Doug Christensen, Tom Stiles, and Jeff Panther's team are going to produce. But with that, Reese Fan, anything final you wanted to share?
Yeah, I just want to touch on some things that were mentioned earlier about Tract A. So in the conditions, let's see, the planning community development department conditions, there are multiple, if not most of them, are regarding tree tracks and those being called out. So as you put it, an enforcing mechanism of sorts, staff will still take in an administrative function the landscaping plan, tree track plan, and all of those for approval at a later date. And then once we have those, if there's any effort of violation, say somebody went and cut down all the trees in their backyard, including that tract, we'd be able to come in and have that remediated.
Okay.
Let's see. I believe that was the only thing I wanted to clarify. Other than that, if any of the concerned parties do want to reach out and have any additional information as to plans that are in place now, road improvements that may be proposed, or what the future landscaping and tree tracks are going to look like, including fencing and anything like that, they can reach out to me, and as those plans come in, they can be shared.
Excellent. Okay, so I believe 27 is the number of exhibits that I admitted into the record, with 27 technically being a placeholder, and that will be what city staff sends to my office tomorrow, that has been agreed upon between the applicant and the city in terms of those two conditions that have been recommended for change. And then I think we can then conclude today's hearing. Technically, the record will stay open until tomorrow for that one limited purpose. Reese Fan provided his contact info for those that were watching in case they wanted to participate. Just to finally check, though, just to be sure, no one showed up in council chambers, correct? As far as we're aware.
Not as far as no one as far as we're aware.
Just maybe a sad Grant back by himself somewhere, or someone in that room. But with that, I believe we will be able to end our hearing today. Man, we're at the end of the year. This was technically, I think, our first hearing with a new stormwater manual, I think, and then the new system whereby I make a final decision. I know that had been worked on by staff for a decade or something. There might be a footnote involved in a different matter that I won't talk about. We call it the footnote in some circles, but had nothing to do with this applicant. But I truly have appreciated working in the city of Lacey. And if I don't end up being the hearing examiner for the city in the future, I know that it had nothing to do with what a wonderful staff this is. And it's me, not you. But we know that we were under contract for this particular hearing. And with that, I'll end today's hearing and get a decision out after the record closes here. I guess at this point it'd be very early, I think, very end of the year, very early in the new year. But again, just closing the record tomorrow. So with that, thanks all. Appreciate everybody.
Thank you, Andrew.
You.